It's my great pleasure and honor to present here this kind of excellent seminar about the recent finding from the Japanese population. I think today many lecturers talk about vitamin D deficiency or insufficiency, but in Japan, I think there is a lot of vitamin D research deficiency or insufficiency. So I'd like to start. More research is needed. I have no conflict of interest to declare. And there are three major topics. One is understand solar radiation in Japan, cancer association. Second is vitamin D calcium and their relation to colorectal cancer and type 2 diabetes. And vitamin D status among Japanese adults. So first, this slide shows the worldwide incidence of colorectal cancer. As you can see, the red color shows there's a clear variation of colorectal cancer incidence. There is a high mortality rates or incidence rate in higher latitude, a lower mortality among low latitude. And in Japan, it's now has a highest mortality rate of colorectal cancer. And this slide shows the time trend of cancer mortality in Japan. And compared to the Western population, we have many internal cancer, digestive cancers, including stomach cancer, colorectal cancer, pancreatic cancers. So, of course, the stomach cancer has a strongly influenced by the H. pylori infection. And liver cancer is also very common, and it is strongly associated with hepatitis C virus infection. And these are showing a decreasing trend, and in the future they will decrease. But colon cancer, prostate cancer in men, and breast cancer in women, they're steadily increasing trend. And they are, we are thinking they're attributed to the westernization, but there are many evidence shows that these cancers are really vitamin D associated cancers. And when I first had a strong interest in vitamin D issue was in 2002, when I saw a picture of mortality according to prefectures in Japan. And I strongly believed at that time that colorectal cancer is a disease of Western-style cancers. So if we use that logic, that colorectal cancer should be high in Tokyo and Osaka, that kind of metropolitan cities. But the fact is not true. There is a hot area in northern parts of Japan. So I was very surprised. Why? So I'm thinking, but there's no answer at that time. But when I searching the PubMed, I encountered an interesting paper. Do sunlight vitamin D reduce the likelihood of colon cancer? Question. By Galland brothers. So I read this paper again and again. Oh, this is a great hint for me to solve the problems. And I searched again the PubMed, that I found another paper published by Grant, Dr. Grant. And he reported a strong association, not only breast, colon, ovary, that is already known, but 8 additional cancers are strongly inversely associated. UVB radiation levels, bladder, esophageal cancer, kidney, lung, pancreatic, and stomach cancer included. So these are the give me a great hint, and that prompted me to analyze the data. So I made a quite simple correlation analysis. Y-axis is the level of solar radiation, and y-axis is the mortality of cancer. And I found a clear inverse association between them. But that was not only colorectal cancer. Esophageal cancer, stomach cancer, pancreatic cancer, gallbladder cancer, all are strongly inversely associated. So I published. I once submitted to the International Journal of Epidemiology, but rejected. But another American journal accepted. And this was the small step for me, but a couple days after my article has published, I received a lot of emails from the US. This is an email from Cedric Garland. Dear Dr. Mizoue, thanks again. And what I was very surprised was he knows the prefecture's name, where the Akita-ken, one of the prefectures located in the northern parts of Japan, which has high mortality rate of cancer. And thank you very much to read every corner of my article and found lowest solar radiation, but highest mortality. And I would like to explain a little bit more about Akita Prefecture-ken using this chance. Akita-ken is situated here, and there is a high mountain in the center of Japan, and that makes the climate in Japan a variety of Japanese climate. And Akita-ken has a lot of heavy snow in winter period. And there many women have a white skin, but they have a highest incidence rate colorectal cancer, but also stomach cancer, cerebrovascular disease, and also suicide. So, of course, they have a good features in Akita Prefecture. They produce very nice quality of rice and also sake, Japanese wine. But heavy drinking is another cause of colorectal cancer. So not only solar radiation, but other factors may influence. But this is very important ecological evidence. So I now then move on to the analytic studies, case control studies. At that time, I was working under the Professor Suminori Kono, Kyushu University, and our group at that time is gathering information, case and control studies of the colorectal cancers. So at that time, calcium and colorectal association, there are a lot of evidence from cohort studies. And I had a strong interest in calcium first. But in some intervention studies among persons with colorectal polyps, calcium supplementation significantly reduced the risk of recurrence of colorectal adenoma. But interestingly, one secondary analysis shows the risk reduction was observed among persons who have higher vitamin D levels, but there is no such association among persons with low vitamin levels. So there are some modification effects. So objective of the first analysis for me was to examine the association, independent association calcium, vitamin D on the risk of colorectal cancer. But I had a strong interest in their modification effects, their interactions. that case control study was a population-based, largest case control study among Japanese populations. An in-person interview was conducted with PC-assisted windows. So interviewers asked about their many lifestyle factors, including diet, how many bowls per day of rice do you consume, and also fish is a rich source of vitamin D. Which type of fish do you usually take? So we conducted this kind of interview-based analysis. And nutrients are calculated according to the food composition tables. And adjustment was made in multiple regression analysis. And these are the variables adjusted in the models. Physical activity and red meat intake that are known to be associated with colorectal cancer risk was adjusted. These are the baseline basic characteristics of study participants. There is no major difference, but cases had a slightly higher body mass index and a lower calcium intake. This is a main result for the relation between calcium intake and colorectal cancer. In line with the previous studies, our study also found a strong inverse association between high calcium intake and lower risk of colorectal cancer. So in the highest calcium intake group, the risk of colorectal cancer decreased by 36%. That was significant. As regards vitamin D intake, the association is less clear, statistical non-significant, but there is a statistical non-significant reduction in risk. So I made a further analysis. I divided in the highest category into two, and I found a further risk reduction in the more higher intake group. So this result shows a much higher vitamin D intake is necessary to show a clear reduction in risk. And also the vitamin D come not only from diet, of course the skin produced, sunlight-induced skin production of vitamin D is very important. So I made a sub-analysis. I divided in two groups, low sunlight exposure group and high sunlight exposure group in daily life. And see the relation between dietary intake of vitamin D and colorectal cancer. And the relation was clear among those who have low sunlight exposure. So diet is important for persons who are less sunlight exposure. But among those who have a high exposure to sunlight, the intake of vitamin D is not so important in the daily life consumption. I also made a combination analysis between the vitamin D and calcium intake. So the relation between calcium intake and colorectal cancer was only evident among if they consume a large amount of vitamin D from diet, as in addition to high exposure, a high outdoor physical activity on leisure or at work, the calcium has the effects to reduce cancer risk. But even they consume large amount of calcium, there is no risk reduction if the vitamin D status is not adequate. So I think this is very clear evidence that vitamin D is necessary to support the effects of calcium. So this is a summary of the evidence. And I had a chance to measure the vitamin D levels, but the outcome was not colorectal cancer, but colorectal adenoma. This is a well-known precursor of colorectal cancer. Similar analysis I conducted, but now we measured, not interview-based data intake. This is a measured vitamin levels and its relation to correct adenoma. These are conducted amongst male self-defense officials retiring. And I also divided into two periods. The one is wintertime vitamin D levels and its association with correct adenoma, and another is summertime vitamin D and its association to correct adenoma. And I found risk reduction among highest hydroxy vitamin D levels. So those who had the highest levels, there is a 40% risk reduction of the prevalence of correct adenoma in the winter period. This was quite consistent when I subdivided into the large adenoma, small adenoma, and the corrected subsite. The evidence is quite consistent. But the finding is a little bit confusing for me. There is a little bit increased risk associated with higher levels. But I checked the data and I found that increased risk in summer season associated with a higher level of vitamin D is only observed with small adenoma. There is less clinical evidence. So large adenoma, there is no associations. But this finding needs some confirmations. But the important message from this data is wintertime period of vitamin D level determines the risk of adenomas, the precursor of. So we should be careful about the vitamin D level in winter. And now I move on to the next topic of type 2 diabetes. So among the OECD countries, US had a second highest prevalence of type 2 diabetes. And Japan, is not so high. But there's no large difference. Of course, the 2 times difference compared to the US. But if we consider the prevalence of obesity, the 1 in 3 US population are obese, has obese, whereas the Japanese 3 among 100 has it. So there's a huge difference in obesity. But the difference of diabetes is not so different than that. So we can say that the Japanese have a higher risk of developing type 2 diabetes in spite of their leaner body mass relative to their body mass. So this is because the Japanese have known to have a lower ability of beta cell to secrete insulin. So although we have a less insulin resistance due to our thinner body mass, we have less ability to secrete insulin. So maybe the type 2 diabetes, there's variation in the etiology. So now I examine the association between calcium, vitamin D for its relation to type 2 diabetes using a large-scale cohort study in Japan. So the name of the cohort study is JPHC, Japan Public Health Center-based cohort studies. More than 100,000 inhabitants participated. That was initiated in 1990, but the more detail and information on diet was obtained at the second survey in 1995 and 1998. And the incidence information was obtained at the third questionnaire survey. So self-reported physician diagnosis of type 2 diabetes was ascertained between the 2 surveys. So diet was assessed by self-administered questionnaires at the 5th surveys. And this is a stream of analysis. And finally, the nearly 60,000 participants were analyzed for data. Their data was analyzed. Similarly, the nutrient intake was energy adjusted and logistic regression analysis was done, and many variables are adjusted in analysis. This is the main result. So this is calcium intake levels, high and low, and this yellow color shows a high vitamin D intake group, and green color shows a low vitamin D intake. I divided similarly. And there's a clear contrast among green persons, low vitamin D intake. Calcium has no effect in reducing the risk of type 2 diabetes in men and women. But we found a statistically significant risk reduction among calcium intake group if their vitamin D, dietary vitamin D is very high in men and women, very consistent. And this again adds evidence that vitamin D play a critical role in reducing, for the action of calcium in reducing risk of type 2 diabetes as well. So maybe the vitamin D has a different pathway mechanism to act on type 2 diabetes and cancers. But they may share same pathways. The one very plausible common mechanism is through the reduction in insulin sensitivity. So low vitamin D levels may increase the risk of insulin resistance, which is associated with the risk of type 2 diabetes. But high insulin resistance status, there are more insulin secreted from the pancreatic beta cells, and they have tumor growth effects leading to the risk of cancers, including colorectal cancers. So this is maybe a very important common pathways, I think. So finally, I will briefly introduce about the vitamin D status in Japan. So I once believed, and many Japanese researchers strongly believed, we are vitamin D rich people. Because fish is a very important diet for Japanese. Also, mushrooms, shiitake mushrooms, they contain a lot of vitamin D. So we don't care about vitamin D, but is it true? I made a cross-sectional studies from the healthy employees. This was sampled in summer season. This was winters. So if we apply the classical vitamin D insufficiency, deficiency categories, very few fall into the category deficient, but there are many insufficient category during the winter period. But this definition should be updated, now updated. So it is very surprising. More than half of the Japanese, healthy Japanese adults working, their vitamin D insufficient, even in summer period. In winters, very little of insufficient. I was very surprised. So we need to do something. We need to actions, not. Also, I recognize that San Diego is a good place to. In Tokyo, latitude is a little bit higher. Skin color is yellow, and you have mixed, but the Caucasians. And we wear thick clothes, but many are T-shirts and food fortification for dairy foods is limited in Japan, but common here in San Diego. But not only latitude and climate is quite different. In Tokyo, we had a very cold winter and very hot summer. So there is a large variations. So in winter, we should have a thick clothes. That means we have a limited place to have exposure to sunlight. But in San Diego, the temperature is very stable. And another thing is that we have lots of rains. So we always carry an umbrella with me. But in San Diego, you don't need to carry umbrella. So you have a lot of chance to have exposure to sunlight. That may cause skin damage, but that may be a reason why the Japanese have a lower, a lot of people suffer from vitamin D deficiency. But luckily, I'm working, besides vitamin D issues, I'm a principal investigator of school health project in our center. So I'm lucky to have a chance to visit developing countries. Last winter, I visited Sri Lanka 3 times. And there, the latitude is 6. And there are lots of strong sunlight. And I visited schools. School children is very healthy, looks very healthy. And the smile is nice. I don't know whether they're vitamin D level status, but maybe they're reaching vitamin D. But nobody knows the vitamin D levels there. Why don't you measure for the elephant? Okay, so my conclusion is sufficient vitamin D is required for the action of calcium in the prevention of colorectal cancer as well as type 2 diabetes. That's a strong message. Many Japanese may be under vitamin D insufficiency, especially during winter period. So intervention studies should determine how much vitamin D is required to attain a sizable reduction in risk of these diseases. So thank you very much for your attention.